Dear friends and colleagues, this is my pleasure to be here. I'm glad that I have this opportunity to talk in front of you and share some of my thoughts and ideas concerning climate justice and its implication on the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. There are over 40 different groups of indigenous people in the Arctic, and these people are the original people of the Arctic. They have been living in the region for thousands of years. Some of these indigenous peoples live transnationally in more than one countries. For example, Sami people live in 4 countries in the European Arctic, and at the same time, Inuit people also live in 4 countries in North American Arctic as well as in Russia. Also in Russian Arctic alone, there are many different groups of indigenous peoples. What is unique about all these indigenous peoples of the Arctic is that they have their own way of life. And these people are the most vulnerable people. And this vulnerability comes from the effect of climate change in the Arctic. Climate change is a major threat in the Arctic. It is so much discussed in any Arctic discussion that climate change today becomes almost synonymous to the Arctic. The impacts in the Arctic of climate change is drastic. According to IPCC report, the report published from Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, temperature rise in the Arctic is twice faster than that of the global average. The consequences of temperature rise in the Arctic can be visible in melting of glaciers and sea ice. It is estimated that within next 25 to 30 years, almost 40% of Greenlandic ice sheet will be melted. And this will have far-reaching consequences, not only for the Arctic, but also for the rest of the world. As sea level will be rising because of melting ice sheet, many other countries of the world beyond the Arctic will be impacted. In particular, small island countries, those who are just above the sea level, will go underwater. In the Arctic, its ecological system will be threatened, which will interrupt ecosystem service, on which Arctic's rich biodiversity is dependent. As Arctic Ocean melts, it becomes more and more accessible, not only for the actors within the Arctic, but also for actors from beyond the Arctic. In addition to major industrial and infrastructural development, offshore oil and gas activities in the Arctic is being on the rise. In particular, in Russian Arctic as well as in North American Arctic, oil and gas activities are more and more taking place. In addition to that, maritime routes through Arctic Ocean is more operational in recent years. The Northern Sea route in particular is being more and more used. Because the route is ice-free for most of the time during summer months, and because the distance is much shorter than that of the traditional sea route, cargo ships in recent times are seen to use the route more often than before. All these activities contribute to emissions of greenhouse gas to the atmosphere, which further accelerates climate change in the Arctic. Now, before moving to talk about the impacts of climate change on the Arctic indigenous communities, let me talk a little bit about climate justice. What does climate justice refer to? It is about responsibility. It is about obligation. It is about duty. What causes climate change? And who are responsible for the climate change to happen? Climate change happens because of twofold reasons. The first, it is about natural process, which result in natural variation in climatic system. And the second, the main reason for climate change is human action that influences the natural process in a negative way. So human activities, for example, industrialization, use of fossil fuel, deforestation, they contribute to emission in greenhouse gas to the atmosphere, and which causes climate change to accelerate. Most industrialized countries are blamed for the climate change to happen because of their actions. International climate change framework split the countries in two categories. Countries located in global north and countries located in global south, representing developed countries and developing countries. So it is said that developed countries are more responsible for climate change to occur, whereas developing countries do share the burden of climate change, even though they do not contribute to emission in greenhouse gas. And actually they suffer the most because of climate change or because of the impact of the climate change. Generally, this imbalance, as it gives rise to problem in the sphere of social, economic, geographic, democratic, ecological sphere, refers to climate injustice. Most Arctic countries are considered as the developed countries. However, Arctic as a region is regarded as developing region of the developed countries. The impacts of climate change on the Arctic and on its population are disproportionate. And this disproportionality impacts socio-economic, cultural, demographic life of the indigenous people of the Arctic. Arctic indigenous communities are the most serious victim of climate change. They suffer the most and they are the vulnerable of all the Arctic population. And this is because they have their own way of survival. Their lives and livelihoods are connected to traditional lands on which they live, and they exercise nature-based livelihood activities. For example, hunting, fishing, reindeer and caribou herding are integral to their culture. These activities do not only provide them with subsistence, they also contribute to their cultural well-being and create the cultural identity of these groups of indigenous people. Now, as climate change accelerates, these activities are threatened. Their traditional economy is threatened. Their way of life is threatened. Their culture is being extinct. So these indigenous communities, they suffer from all these kind of threats, and they are at the verge of extincting their unique identity. Climate change is a threat multiplier. The threats facing the indigenous communities of the Arctic are multidimensional. And these threats can be explained by using the concept of human security as a tool. I find it important to use human security as an analytical tool when threats are arising out of the impacts of climate change, which cause climate injustice for the indigenous people of the Arctic. Now, what human security refers to? Human security is about putting security at the level of individual and community, in contrast to the traditional understanding of security. The traditional understanding of security is military-centric. It is state-oriented. Whereas referent object of human security is individual or community, where individual or community suffer from threats arising out of non-traditional aspect of security. And this non-traditional aspect of security includes issues related to economy, environment, political participation, social cohesion, health and well-being, etc. Given that the impacts of climate change touch upon all the aspects of security threats that human security framework present, it is about protecting and promoting the rights of indigenous people to achieve a set of goals. And this set of goals can be achieved by guaranteeing a set of freedoms from fear, from needs, from indignity, from vulnerability. And only then climate justice can be established. Thank you so much.